Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and so far in this series we've got all the pieces together, and last time we even hooked it up so that we can have a conversation with our NPCs. However, we've got these rather bland looking option buttons that just sit there all the time and don't do anything. It's time we actually made those buttons possible and created some branching dialogue options. That's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. We're going to start off with the easy part, which is actually creating the options. So let's go ahead and head into our dialog SO folder and open up the dialog SO. And here, similar to how we created dialog lines by using this system serializable class that had a speaker and text, we're also going to make a system serializable class for our options. We'll call this one dialog option, and it's also going to have two options here. The first is just going to be a public string, which we'll call our option text. This will just be what appears on the buttons themselves. And then after that, we'll have a public dialog SO called next dialog. This will be the conversation that will be loaded if you choose that option. Now all we need to do is come up top here, and along with a dialog line, we want to make sure that there's a public dialog option array as well. We'll just call this array options and then head back into Unity. Now if we go to our SO greeting with Bob that we made earlier, you'll notice there's now an options section down below. Let's make two options this time. Now let's say you choose tell me more, and in this case we're going to want to load a new conversation where he tells us more. So let's head to create. We're going to go to dialog and dialog node, and here naming is going to be important, as a big game will have hundreds or even thousands of conversations. For now, I'm just going to use the same prefix greeting with Bob, and then I'll add the suffix of the option we chose, in this case, tell me more. We can then open it up and just create a little conversation here. Let's have Purple Bob respond, "It's really awesome, be sure to check it out," and then Nightrunner will give his answer. If we wanted, we could add new options and have this branch even further, but let's keep it simple for now. We can head back to the parent greeting with Bob, and now we can drag this dialog SO that we just made in here under tell me more. We'll also make a new one. Let's make one if we're not interested. Here I'll just copy the tell me more and rename it with not interested as the suffix. We'll just write a quick conversation that makes sense if you chose this option, head back to the parent, and make sure that we drag in this new dialog SO. And just like that, we've created a little conversation with a couple of branches. You can see how easy it is to quickly construct branching dialogues that could go on and on for as long as you like. Now, just before we get doing any actual scripting, I'm just going to go to our choices here. You'll notice that each of these options is not actually a button right now. It's just an image with a Text Mesh Pro underneath of it. Let's shift-click all of those options, and here we're just going to add a button component. This is just going to allow us to use Unity's built-in helpers for making them light up, for example, when you click on them, and also for calling different events to happen once we do that clicking. We'll set that up in just a sec. First, let's head into our dialog manager. Let's begin here under our header for UI references, and we're just going to make a public button array called choice buttons. Then we can come down to awake, and we just want to make sure that we actually toggle all of those buttons off on awake, as while we're currently turning our canvas off, we don't want it to happen that when we turn the canvas on, the buttons show up before we want them. So here we're just going to use a for each loop. Now here what we want to do is just for each variable, we'll call them button, in our choice buttons array, we simply want to turn them off. So we'll just grab our button.game object and set it active to false. Now, whenever we advance dialog, if we run out of dialog lines, instead of ending the conversation, we're going to call a new show choices method instead. Now this will be a private method, and as soon as we get there, we want to do a check. And essentially we just want to say if our current dialog options length is greater than 0, meaning if there's at least one option. And then we'll also create an else, so if there are no dialog options, and here we can go ahead and actually end the dialog. Now if we actually do have options though, we're going to use a for loop. This is different than a for each loop, which immediately does something to all of the things in the array. This one goes through them one at a time. So here, we just start with an integer that's at 0, and as long as that integer is less than our current dialog options length, we'll continue to do the loop. After each time through this though, we use this I++ to increment it by 1. So the next time through it, we'll look at the option number 1, and then option number 2, etc. As soon as it runs out of options, it will break out of this loop. Here we're just going to make a quick helper line, which is just a bit of a shortcut. We'll make a option variable, which is just going to hold the current dialog option that we're currently looking at. This will just save us from having to go current dialog.options I a whole bunch of times, and we can just use that shortcut word of options. So First time through the loop, we want to get choice button, and it'll be 0 to start. And we want to look in its children for a TextMesh Pro object. And then we're just going to set its text to be equal to the option, here we're using that shortcut we made, dot option text. Next, we'll just get that choice button I, and essentially we just want to turn the object on. So we'll go gameObject.setActive true. Well, the quick bit of setup in Unity, we can click on our dialog canvas and we now have a choice buttons option. Since I've got 4 buttons, I'll put a 4 here. And now we're just going to drag each of these option buttons into those slots. Now when we get in the game and go talk to our NPC, we can hit the talk button and you'll notice the options are no longer showing up, so that's working. When we get to the end of the conversation, our new options show up. Now, they don't actually do anything except flash when we click on them, and we can't even end the dialogue yet, but we're off to a good start. So next we want to actually give those buttons the ability to do something. So we'll address each button, and what we want to do now is use its onClick function. I'll show how this works in just a sec, but essentially what we want to just do is add a listener to this button so when we click it, it knows to do something. If you've worked with buttons before, you'll be familiar with this. We can look at our button here and it's got this onClick at the bottom. Now normally you could manually fill this in by dropping scripts in here and then selecting methods to run. However, we're not going to be able to do that as our onClick will do different things for each button depending on the conversation we're in, and so we'll do this dynamically in code instead. So when we turn the buttons on, we're also going to tell them that when we click them, they need to call a new choose_option method, and they're going to pass along whatever option they're currently looking at. And specifically for the option, they're going to pass the next dialogue. So it'll just pass along the conversation that needs to happen if you click this button. All right, so we'll make a private choose_option method, and again, remember we're passing along the next dialogue, so that's just a dialogue SO, which we can just call dialogue SO. So first we'll just do a little check here. If the dialogue SO is null, meaning it was an option that didn't actually have a next dialogue associated with it, then we just want to call end dialogue, as we don't have any lines of dialogue or options left. However, in most cases, we will be passing along some sort of an option. And here we can just reuse the structure we've already created. We're now starting a new conversation, so we'll start dialogue and pass that new SO along so that our script can just continue to run the next dialogue. And we can circle through this as many times as we want. As we noticed in our last test, my little end dialogue thing that I put here for testing and thought would work actually didn't, so let's just get rid of it since it's not doing anything anyways. What we'll do instead is actually just create an end button that will show up whenever dialogue reaches its complete ending. So here, we're going to get our choice button 0, meaning the very first of our buttons, and we're actually going to turn that object on. However, before we do it, let's set up this end button. So, just like we did up above, we're going to get a component in the child. We'll grab its TextMesh Pro text and set its text to be equal to. And here I'm just going to put end, as that's what I want the button to say on it. You can make it say whatever you like. We're also going to want to add a listener here, so that this time, if you click on the end button, it's just going to have a listener that calls the end dialogue method. All right, with that done, when you get in the game and talk to your NPC, you can get to the end, we'll see our dialogue options, and you can click them, and now it will actually load our next conversation. We can press buttons to work our way through those, and at the end we can press a button again, and we now have our end option. You'll notice though that we've got the old option still kind of hanging over from before, and so let's get rid of that. All right, so let's just come down to the bottom of our dialogue manager below all the methods that are actually doing things like ending dialogue or showing options. And here we're just going to make a helper method called clear choices, as we'll be calling this from a number of different places in our script. Here we'll use a for each loop again, and for each button in our choice buttons, we are going to want to perform 2 actions. The first is to get that button's game object and just set its activeness to false. The other is just going to be to grab that onClick, and here we're going to remove all listeners. That way the button won't still have artifacts listening and trying to do old conversations after those have already ended. Now that we've made this clear choices, we just need to actually call it from a couple of different places. First off, anytime we call the show choices method, let's go ahead and clear away any old ones that may be remaining. Next, in choose option, anytime we're about to start a new conversation, let's clear the choices from the old one. And finally, just to be extra careful, in end dialogue, if we're wrapping it up, let's go ahead and clear those choices. With all that cleanup done, we now have a fully branching dialogue system. We can have it branch as many times as we want. We can choose options, work through those dialogues, walk away at the end, come on back, and then have the conversation over again. And this time, if we want, choose the option we didn't do the previous time. This is working pretty nicely. It does have a few bugs in it. There's a couple of little things that are not quite polished and working right, and so I will do a video a little later where we look at how to do that. If you come across any bugs yourself, feel free to report them and I'll make sure to add those in that video. That said, we've also got lots more to do in this series. We want to make dialogue that only pops up if you have certain items or have visited certain places. We're also going to add a cool camera zoom so that when we're talking to this NPC, the dialogue doesn't cover up our characters. We want to make sure that it moves so we can still see what's happening in the game. We'll get to all of that and more in the videos to come. I hope to see you there. Until that time, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.